Right off the bat, you can tell that View from Below is inspired by Undertale, and you'll notice a lot of similarities between the two. But this game delves more into depression and has a more darker tone to it, and it has a little bit of Christianity sprinkled into it to help develop the world and to deliver some of the messages that it has. And those messages won't be your typical Christian love thy neighbor type of things. It's going to be God's wanting you to kill your son, or else he's going to make your penis a couple inches smaller. So this game's going to hit you with some heavy topics. But it does have that Undertale charm to it of being seriously silly with your interactions with the regular people, especially with one of the characters named Belle. I do have to admit that I had to grow to like this game in the beginning because when you first start off, the story's a bit fast paced and you don't know who your character is or what's going on at first. So you're kind of just left in the dark trying to figure it out while exploring the new world that you're placed into. Which isn't a bad thing, but it does make connecting to the characters or to what's going on more difficult because you don't have any emotional attachment to them yet, which kind of develops into this feeling of, I don't know what's going on, so I don't care. But as you continue, you'll learn more about the characters and their backstories and about who you're playing as, which is Ash. And before every chapter, there is a cutscene that features Ash and his grandpa, and you'll get to know how that plays into the story and how Ash grows as a character, along with all the other characters too. The whole premise of the game is that you've been summoned to save the world because you've been selected as the chosen one. But within this other world that you've been taken to, you're wanted for a sacrifice. In the beginning, the dialogue can get a bit cringy, like at one moment they use sus, and that definitely won't age well, but since you are playing as a high schooler, I guess it makes sense, but I can see how it's going to turn some people away and how it's not going to age well within the year. There are also some other cringy moments like a turd monster. Overall, they're not detrimental to the experience, and they only last within like the first chapter and completely away after the second. So once you get through the beginning grind of the game, of like the whole exposition and whatnot, you'll be fine. One more thing in the first chapter before we get to the combat, there were some good opportunities for the player to have an option in what they can do. Like in one spot, there's a patch of flowers that you need to get across to pull a lever to continue on with the story. But the problem is that the ghost there planted the flowers and it's his little flower patch. You don't want to ruin it because you just don't want to be a dick. And it also doesn't fit the main character to do that type of thing. But the game doesn't give you an option to find another way to pull that lever without having to go through the flower patch. So you're just forced into being a dick and trampling over this guy's flowers. So you feel bad when you talk to him, he's like, you're dead to me. It's like, oh man, I'm sorry, I'm forced to. So I would have liked to see more freedom in the choice that you have in certain scenarios that you'll come across, but it's not that bad. This is probably the most extreme example within the game. You also don't have a passive option within combat like in Undertale. You can only fight or run away, so death is the only option. Which makes sense within the story since most of the people within the world that you're thrown into are trying to kill you. And to assist in your killing spree against these creatures, you have spells that are actually a lot better than the regular attacks, but they're also harder to pull off. But to be honest, the only spell that really is hard to pull off is the last one, but once you get the hang of it, it's actually not that hard. So the only thing holding you back from using spells is the mana use. Most of the time, especially against bosses, the regular attacks are going to suck dick, so you're better off just using magic and carrying a couple of mana potions with you. Like in Pokemon, your main character's name is Ash, and you'll find enemies within tall grass. Therefore, your main objective within the game is just to kill them all. Well, that doesn't mean the enemies won't sit back and let you smack their ass with your sword. So they're going to attack you back, and those attacks are actually pretty hard to evade. You're going to need good reflexes because of their attack speed, and there's just no time to read the instructions to invade until you like go through the fight a couple of times. And your character has a sizable hitbox, like with how tall he is, so it would be a good time to be short. But because of how tall he is, it makes dodging what's on screen a lot more harder, especially with how fast those attacks come in. So at that point, it becomes a game of skill and how good your reflexes are. But some of the attacks, it's like, how the fuck am I supposed to evade this? And I did notice that evading feels better on a keyboard compared to a gamepad because it just feels a bit more tighter, like you have more control over where your guy goes on the screen. Nonetheless, some of the attacks from the bosses do seem like they need pixel perfect reflexes in order to dodge their attacks, but overall, it shouldn't be too much of a problem because this game isn't too difficult. Despite the skill needed to evade attacks, this is still definitely a game of stats, so if you're not skilled enough at dodging, you might want to consider grinding out a level before continuing. I do like the bosses, and they are fun to fight against, and they do feel like they stand out from the regular enemies, so that is a plus. And the music during these fights is pretty good. I would say the soundtrack is well composed and used in pretty good ways, but I wouldn't say that's anything groundbreaking or flashy, but what it does well. In addition to clapping some demon ass, there are puzzles within the game. They feel more like speed bumps than a challenge, but I would say that the last puzzles do require some thought. They usually involve moving boxes into certain spots with obstacles that prevent movement, color matching boxes, walking on ice where you have to step on every tile without stepping on one of them twice, and a couple of others. And there's also optional puzzles that if you do them, you'll get a reward. But the optional ones are more like puzzles that you can't find the solution to until you progress further in the story. So it's more so something that you come back to. There are also some other activities that you can do too, like trivia. There's this knight that you can train to get buff and upgrade your strength. And of course, there are secrets that you can find that unlock more of the story. For example, you can't unlock the secret ending unless you find, I think, 6 rooms that are hidden within each area of the game. Speaking of the story, the game does get better the more you progress as pieces of the story come together and the characters develop. And I've got to say that the character development in this game is pretty good. Every major character has their own backstory that you learn throughout the game, and every one of them grows in their own way. Everyone plays a part within the narrative, so no one's like a throwaway character. And another interesting part is that everyone plays a role in either Ash's backstory or how he develops as a person throughout the game. Even though all the characters develop in their own way, only one of them can be influenced by your own actions, which to be honest is a bit disappointing considering the nature of the game. But it's understandable since this game was made by one person, so that would have been a lot more work that he would have had to undertake. There's also a nice amount of world building that you can discover by talking to the people, and that's where Christianity starts to play a role in the game, and also a bit of depression. With one of the characters, you can talk to him and he's trying to pray to a god, but there is no answer to him. And within the churches in the game, you can ask to be healed, but usually nothing happens, which then implies that there is no god. So it kind of builds this whole feeling of despair, but hopeful for something that would happen. It also helps set up the moral of the game of how you're alone, but you can still find the determination within yourself. You'll mainly see that within the interactions between Ash and his grandpa. And you'll also see the Christianity play a role within Ash's backstory, but that goes into spoiler territory, and I don't want to go to there yet. Now, with depression, you can see that within some of the characters. Most of the time, it's implied. Other times, it's more outright, but they don't say it. One character doesn't really show it, but you can find implications of it by interacting with stuff within his home. So I did like the little details of that you can discover on your own. So overall, I did enjoy the story. It was a bit rough at first, mainly in like the first two chapters, just because it's the exposition, you don't really know what's going on yet. But it all does come together very well in the end. And my first playthrough took about 8 hours, and I did a goody two shoes type of run. When you beat the game, you unlock a challenge mode, which to me it felt the same, probably because I got better and I knew what to expect. But I will admit that the last boss's attacks hurt like Jesus slapping the sins out of you, which is okay because it's the last boss and doesn't really matter. It doesn't like make it too difficult where it's impossible. The only thing from that would probably be if you're under leveled, you're most likely going to die in one hit, but at that point you should be at the right level. When I played through the game a second time, it was neat going through it again, because you know the story and it has that same feeling of reading a book again and seeing things in a new perspective. But the story isn't this blessed child that is perfect in every way. It still has some dirty sins that it's been hiding, so I'm going to delve into that now. If you don't want any spoilers, you can feel free to end the video. I would recommend this game for anyone that's interested, and I had fun playing with it. I really enjoyed it. So thank you for watching, and now on to spoilers. So there are some inconsistencies in the story that I want to talk about. First off, in the near beginning of the story, you have Ash that's pretty scared. He's not very brave yet, and he sees a well, and he knows there's a giant spider in the area, but he still goes into it, and it has this just, he hasn't really grown into the person he is yet. He's still that wimpy high schooler kid that gets bullied. So it was odd seeing that jump in character so soon. And speaking of the spider, I wish that the Soul Piece bosses had better names to them instead of having like some stockholder name like Soul Piece Numero Uno. Just something unique to them would have been better. The watchers that you unlock in the challenge mode don't really say anything new. They just say parts of the story that were implied, so they don't add anything to the story, which is a bit disappointing, but there's not really much to add, I guess. It's weird how Iris just completely forgets about you and chases after an ex while you're chasing after Iris, trying to figure out what's going on, which creates this odd situation where Iris just forgets about her entire mission of making you the chosen one and saving the world, and tries to fix her own past by chasing after an ex while forgetting about you. It's just, it doesn't fit well and feels unnecessary. And it makes Iris look like a red flag in a relationship, which is ironic because she actually is within the story. So it's a bit funny in that aspect, I guess. And the point where Melody is captured and you see her revealed on the bridge is also an odd moment. It's just like, why would they show them that this is Melody? And how did Melody even get captured in the first place, even though she's been evading capture for like a decade? It just doesn't add up. And she's definitely shown that she's capable of taking on the Red Skulls on her own. So it's this weird moment that feels like artificial drama. And Melody's woes don't end here. She somehow runs out of the church in critical condition, even though she's like had to be carried to that church in the first place, but she just says, fuck it, I'm running off. And she somehow has a cigarette that she supposedly pulled out of nowhere. It's also very weird that the Piety Chapel is right next door to the Crimson Chin Church. So I guess they're neighbors that hate each other or something. I do have to say that everything I've said so far is nothing major that ruins the story or makes it less enjoyable. They're just things that make you stop and go, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't seem right. However, I do wish that the evil route got a bit more fleshed out rather than the main differences being with the interactions with Belle and the ending that you can choose, which honestly doesn't really matter what you've done in the past, you still get the same two choices that you can pick. And the only thing that really does change that choice is if you kill Iris or not, which unlocks or disables the death ending, which is really the only choice that matters in terms of the ending. I would have liked to see it develop more with Rose and having you like team up with her against the Crimson God and seeing more repercussions from killing Iris, like maybe having Melody be killed by the Crimson God since Iris is dead and Belle hates you, so he doesn't show up and Melody then maybe has to sacrifice herself to save you. That way the story still plays out the way it is within the game without having to change much. Still, it's odd having Belle save you, even though I understand how Ash showed him bravery when he goes into the Crimson Chin Church to save Melody. Maybe he could have saved Melody instead and we play as her for a bit instead of saving Ash. Lastly, the only changes that I could notice when doing an evil run is that the dialogue with Belle changes, and that's about it. I didn't really see anything else. But of course, hindsight is 2020 and there may have been some circumstances preventing adding all this type of stuff in, like the huge amount of work it would have taken a single developer to do. Plus, it's hard to imagine how everyone will interpret your story when you already know everything about your story. Once again, this stuff doesn't harm the narrative of the story, it's just extra stuff that could have been added in but wasn't. Nonetheless, I still very much enjoyed what the game had to offer. So if any of this piques your interest, I would recommend playing this game. And despite being inspired by Undertale, A View from Below stands on its own, like how Bloodborne is to Dark Souls. They both use the same type of gameplay, they're both in the same genre, but they have different styles of using that formula. I would stand by the argument that A View from Below is not a clone of Undertale, since it has a unique and satisfying experience to offer in its own but similar style to that of Undertale. I do look forward to A View from Below's developer Jack Astral's next game, which you can stay up to date about on his Twitter page, which I will have a link to in the description below. That's it for this one. Hopefully you found this video helpful, and thank you for watching. See ya.